diesel was still humming under my boots, a low, steady vibration that usually grounds me, but as I sat in that vinyl booth at a nameless diner 3 hours north of the Miami Pier, the silence from the table behind me felt like a physical weight. I just left the salt spray and the wreckage of a 16-year-old betrayal behind, thinking I'd finally cleared my conscience, but then I heard it, a small, hollow voice that cut right through the grease smoke and the clatter of silverware. "Mommy, if we eat today, does that mean we have to starve tomorrow?" The woman's intake of breath was sharp, the sound of a heart breaking in real time, and I realized that while I'd buried my ghosts at sea, there were living nightmares sitting right in my rear view. The road doesn't care about your closure, it just keeps demanding you show up for the next mile. You're watching Highway Stories Untold. When the world turns a blind eye to the truth, strong souls like you step up, drop your experiences in the comments, and inspire the fight. The smell of burnt coffee and cheap floor wax is usually a comfort after a long haul, a sign that the world is still turning in its predictable, grimy way. I'd pulled the Peterbilt into this gravel lot just off I-95, somewhere between the coastal humidity and the inland pine barrens, needing a moment to let the adrenaline from the pier wash off me. My hands were still a little stiff from the sea air, and the phoenix pin on my lapel felt heavy, a reminder of the justice we'd finally pulled out of the Atlantic. Sarah was asleep in the sleeper berth back at the truck. She needed the rest after what we'd been through on the Azure Dream. I'd stepped out just to grab a coffee and clear the last of the salt from my throat. The diner was nearly empty, just the way I like it at 2 in the morning. A few weary travelers, a local deputy nursing a lukewarm cup, and a mother and son in the booth directly behind me. I hadn't looked at them when I sat down. Years on the road teach you to respect the privacy of the night owls. But the silence in their booth was different. It wasn't the silence of people who were tired. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of people who were scared. I was staring at the reflection of the neon open sign in my black coffee when the kid spoke. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. His voice was a thin thread of a sound, the kind of question a child should never have the vocabulary to ask. "Mommy, eat today means starve tomorrow?" I froze. The spoon in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could hear the mother's response, or rather the lack of one. There was a soft, wet sound, like she was trying to swallow a sob before it could break. Then, the rustle of a plastic bag. "We're going to be okay, Leo," she whispered. Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges like an old tarp. "We have the crackers, and we'll get to Grandma's by noon tomorrow. We just have to make it to the state line." "But the man took the suitcase," the boy said. "He took the money for the bus." I felt that familiar heat starting at the base of my neck. The same heat I felt when I realized the captain on the yacht was the man who betrayed my unit at the Ridge. It's a slow-burning fuse that lights whenever I smell a bully. I took a slow sip of my coffee, using the dark liquid to steady my pulse. I'm a trucker. I mind my own business. That's the rule of the road. But the road also has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be when the world decides to tilt on its axis. I caught their reflection in the darkened window across from me. The mother was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep was going to fix. She was wearing a thin windbreaker that offered no protection against the air conditioning, and she was meticulously breaking a single peanut butter cracker into 4 pieces. The boy was staring at the small plate with a hunger that wasn't just physical. It was an ancient, hollow kind of want. I looked down at my own plate. I'd ordered a trucker's special, 3 eggs, bacon, hash browns, and a stack of pancakes I hadn't even touched. Suddenly, the smell of the maple syrup felt sickening. I checked the diner. The waitress was at the far end of the counter scrolling on her phone. The deputy was staring out the front window. I stood up, my joints popping, and turned around. I didn't make it a confrontation. I just leaned one hand on the top of their booth, keeping my voice low and level, the way I'd talk to a skittish animal or a rookie driver who'd just jackknifed in the snow. "Ma'am," I said. She flinched. It wasn't a small movement. It was a full-body recoil, her hands flying up to cover the crackers like they were gold bullion. Her eyes were wide, darting toward the door, then back to me. She saw the grey in my beard, the veteran's pin on my hat, and the way I wasn't crowding her space. She didn't relax, but she stopped trembling for a second. "I ordered way too much food," I said, nodding toward my untouched plate. "My stomach's still a bit sour from the sea air. If you and the scout here don't help me out, the cook's going to think I'm insulting his mother. I'd hate to see it go to waste." She looked at the plate, then at me. Her throat moved as she swallowed. We can't pay you back, sir." "Wasn't asking for payment," I said. "Just a favor. I'm Jack." The boy, Leo, was looking at me now. He had the same eyes as his mother, but there was a spark of curiosity there that the world hadn't quite snuffed out yet. He looked at the pancakes, then at his mum. "Is he a giant, Mummy?" he whispered. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first one I'd seen. "No, Leo. I think he's just a driver." I slid the plate onto their table. I watched the boy's eyes light up, but he didn't grab for it. He waited for her nod. When she gave it, he started eating with a controlled desperation that made my chest tighten. I sat back down in my booth, facing them now, and watched the mother take a small piece of toast. She ate it like it was a holy sacrament. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Up to Georgia," she said, her voice a little stronger now that she had some calories in her system. "My mother has a place in Savannah. We just have to get there." "Savannah's a long haul from here," I noted, "especially without a rig." "You mentioned a bus?" Her face clouded over again, the fear rushing back in. She looked toward the diner door. "We were at the terminal in Miami. A man, he said he was with the security office. He told me I had a prohibited item in my bag. He took it to inspect it. When he didn't come back, I went to the desk. They told me there was no security office. He took everything, Jack. Our tickets, my cash, my ID, everything." I felt the familiar click in my brain, the sound of a situation shifting from a tragedy to a crime. "Did you call the police?" She shook her head, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the dust on her cheek. "I can't. My ex, he's a sergeant in that district. He told me if I ever left, he'd use the system to find me. That man at the terminal, he knew my name. He knew where I was going. He didn't just steal my money, he was sending a message." She reached into her windbreaker pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't money. It was a Polaroid photo, slightly blurred. It showed her and Leo sitting in a park, and across the back, written in thick, aggressive black marker, were the words, "Running is for track stars. See you at the finish line." I looked at the photo, then at the deputy sitting 20 feet away, oblivious. The world is full of people who think a badge or a title gives them the right to own another human being. I just spent the last 12 hours dealing with a man who thought he could bury a chemical spill and a betrayal under a captain's uniform. I wasn't about to let a crooked sergeant in Miami pull the same move on a woman and a child who were just trying to survive the night. "What's your name, ma'am?" I asked. "Elena," she said. "Well, Elena." I stood up again, pulling my keys from my pocket. I could feel the weight of the Peterbilt waiting in the lot, the chrome shining under the yellow streetlights. "The bus is a slow way to travel, and the terminal isn't safe for you right now. I've got a load of electronics heading north, and a wife who'd probably appreciate some company in the cab. Savannah's right on my route." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for the hidden hook. People in her position have learned that nothing is free, but she saw the way I stood, feet planted, shoulders square, not moving an inch toward her. "Why?" she asked. "Because," I said, "I just spent a long time realizing that some things are worth standing up for, no matter how much time has passed, and because no kid should have to ask if eating today means starving tomorrow." She looked at Leo, who was currently finishing the last of the hash browns. Then she looked back at me and nodded. I didn't know then that the man who took her bag was already in the parking lot. I didn't know that the message on that photo wasn't just a threat. It was a tracking beacon. But as we walked out into the cool night air toward the rig, I felt the familiar hum of the road calling to me. Justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about making sure the good ones have a lane to run in. The gravel crunched under my boots. a harsh, rhythmic sound that seemed too loud in the stillness of the Florida night. I walked a half step ahead of Elena, my eyes scanning the shadows between the rows of parked rigs. The parking lot of a 24-hour diner is a graveyard of stories, most of them forgotten by dawn, but the way Elena was clutching Leo's hand told me their story was currently being written in blood and adrenaline. I could feel the weight of the air, heavy, humid, and smelling of diesel exhaust and stagnant swamp water. It's the kind of air that sticks to your skin, making every movement feel like you're pushing through a curtain. "Keep close," I said, my voice barely a rumble. I didn't look back at her. I didn't need to. I could hear her shallow, rapid breathing. "My rig is the black Peterbilt at the edge of the lot, the one with the sleeper berth. Is it safe?" Leo whispered. He was trying to sound brave, but his voice cracked on the last word. "Safest place on the East Coast right now, Scout," I replied. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold steel of my keys. My thumb traced the edge of the Phoenix pin on my lapel again. It was a reflex now, a tether to the man I used to be and the man I'd decided to be again after the mess on the Azure Dream. As we approached the truck, the chrome grille caught the yellow light of the high-mast lamps, looking like the teeth of some great sleeping beast. I climbed up the steps, the familiar metal grates biting into the soles of my boots, and tapped twice on the door before opening it. I didn't want to startle Sarah. The interior light flickered on. Sarah was sitting up in the bunk, her hair slightly mussed from sleep, but her eyes were instantly sharp. She didn't ask questions. She saw me, then she saw the terrified woman and the hungry-looking boy standing in the gravel below. She'd been married to me long enough to know that when I brought people to the truck at 3 a.m, it wasn't for a social visit. "Jack?" she asked, her voice steady. "We've got company for the haul to Savannah," I said. "Elena and Leo. They had a run-in with some trouble at the terminal." Sarah slid out of the bunk with a grace that always surprised me. She didn't hesitate. She reached down and offered a hand to Elena, pulling her into the cab. "Come on in, honey. It's cramped, but it's dry. Leo, you like movies? We've got a small screen in the back and some juice in the cooler." I watched the tension leak out of Elena's shoulders for a split second as Sarah took charge. That's the thing about Sarah. She doesn't just provide safety, she provides a perimeter. But my own internal radar was still pinging. I stayed on the steps, looking back toward the diner. A dark sedan was idling near the entrance. No lights, just the low thrum of an engine that didn't belong to a traveler. It was parked at an angle that gave the driver a clear view of my rig. "Jack?" Sarah's voice had a different edge now. She'd seen what I was looking at. "Get them into the sleeper," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Keep the curtains pulled." I didn't wait for her to respond. I stepped down back into the gravel. The heat in my neck was back, hotter than before. I wasn't just a trucker anymore. I was a target who had just painted a bullseye on his own back by opening the door. But I've never been good at keeping the door closed when the person knocking is out of options. The sedan's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a generic windbreaker, the kind security guards or off-duty cops wear to look civilian. He was the man from the description, tall, with a face like a hatchet, and eyes that didn't seem to hold any light. He didn't walk toward me with the stride of a common thief. He walked with the entitlement of a man who held a badge in his pocket, even if it wasn't his district. "That's a nice rig, driver," he called out. His voice was oily, the kind of sound that makes you want to wash your ears. "Lot of miles on those tires. Hate to see them get slashed in a place like this." I didn't move. I leaned back against the fuel tank, crossing my arms. I let the silence stretch. In a confrontation, the first person to talk is usually the one trying to convince themselves they're in control. I didn't need convincing. "You're a long way from the Miami bus terminal," I said. The man stopped about 10 feet away. He smirked, a jagged expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a traveler, just like you. I just happened to notice some property of mine getting loaded into your cab. The lady and the kid, they belong to a friend of mine, a very important friend. People aren't property, I said, and the last time I checked, stealing a woman's ID and her child's bus money is a felony, not a friendship. The man's smirk vanished. He took a step closer, his hand drifting toward his waistband. It was a deliberate move, a threat disguised as a gesture. You don't want to do this, old man. You've got a wife in there. You've got a load to deliver. You step out of this, and I might forget I saw your plates. You stay in it, and your life gets very complicated very fast. I felt the familiar tightening in my gut. This was the moment of commitment. The playbook I live by doesn't allow for middle ground. You either stand the line or you let it be crossed. If I backed down now, Elena and Leo would be back in that sedan before the sun hit the horizon, and the starve tomorrow question would become their permanent reality. My life is already complicated, I said, my voice as cold as the Atlantic depths I'd just left. I just spent a day watching a man who thought he was untouchable lose everything because he forgot that some people still keep their word. I made a promise to that kid in there that he wouldn't go hungry. I intend to keep it. The man let out a short, sharp laugh. A promise? You're going to throw your life away for a kid you met 20 minutes ago over some eggs? You're a fool, Redline. Maybe, I said, but I'm a fool with a dash cam that's been recording this entire conversation, a wife who's already dialed the state patrol, and a very heavy truck between you and that woman. It was a lie. About the state patrol, anyway. Sarah was waiting for my signal, but the man didn't know that. He hesitated. He looked at the dash of the Peterbilt, where the small red light of the camera was indeed blinking. He looked at the size of me, and the way I wasn't backing down even an inch. Sergeant Miller isn't going to like this, he hissed. Then tell Miller he can come find me, I said. I'll be on I-95 North. I'm easy to spot, but tell him to bring more than one lackey in a rented Chevy. I've hauled heavier loads than him through worse storms than this. The man stared at me for a long beat, the air between us vibrating with the threat of violence. I could see the calculation in his eyes. The risk of a public brawl at a diner versus the strategic withdrawal. He wasn't a fighter, he was a bully's errand boy. He spat on the gravel, turned, and walked back to the sedan. This isn't over, he yelled over his shoulder as he got in. It never is, I muttered to myself. I watched the sedan peel out of the lot, the tires screaming against the asphalt. I didn't feel relief. I felt the start of a countdown. He was going to call Miller. Miller was going to use whatever resources he had to flag me down. I had a 400-mile gauntlet ahead of me, and I was carrying the only things that mattered to a man like Miller, his control and his secrets. I climbed back into the cab and slammed the door. The sound echoed in the small space. Sarah was standing by the passenger seat, her phone in her hand. Elena was huddled in the corner of the sleeper berth, her arms wrapped around Leo. He's gone for now, I said, my voice returning to its steady, professional tone. But we need to move. Now. Jack, what did he mean about Miller? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. How did he find us so fast? I looked at the rumpled windbreaker she was wearing, then at the small bag she'd managed to keep. Did you have anything else on you? Anything that man at the terminal touched? She shook her head, then stopped. The photo. He gave me back the photo of me and Leo. He said it was a souvenir. I held out my hand. She passed me the Polaroid. I turned it over in the dim light of the cab. I didn't look at the writing this time. I looked at the thickness of the backing. I pulled a small pocket knife from my belt and carefully pried at the corner of the plastic. A small, flat silver disc slid out. A GPS tracker, no bigger than a nickel, but powerful enough to paint a target on us from 100 miles away. He didn't just steal your money, I said, showing it to Sarah. He turned you into a walking beacon. Sarah's face went hard. We're going to be hunted all the way to the state line, aren't we? Not if I can help it, I said. I looked at the tracker, then at the window. But we aren't taking the main highway. Miller expects us to run. He expects us to be scared. He doesn't know that when a trucker gets backed into a corner, he doesn't just run. He shifts gears. I threw the tracker into a nearby trash can as I fired up the engine. The 500-horsepower Caterpillar roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that filled the cab with a sense of purpose. I felt the vibration in the steering wheel, a call to action. "Buckle up," I said, shifting into first. "We've got a long night ahead of us, and I've got a feeling the road is about to get very narrow." As we pulled out of the gravel lot, I looked in the side mirror. The diner was fading into the darkness, a small island of light in a sea of shadows. I knew Miller was out there. I knew the security guy was already making the call. But as I glanced back at Leo, who was now tucked under a blanket Sarah had found for him, I knew I wasn't just hauling freight. I was hauling a future. And in my world, that's the only load that truly matters. The dashboard lights of the Peterbilt were a cool, rhythmic green, casting long shadows across the cabin as we bypassed the I-95 ramp. I took a sharp right onto a two-lane blacktop that cut through the heart of the Florida scrub, a ghost road truckers only take when they need to be invisible. My hands were light on the wheel, feeling the 60,000 pounds of high-end electronics behind me. In the sleeper berth, the silence was heavy. I could hear Elena's shallow breathing. She was a woman who had spent years waiting for the other shoe to drop, and tonight it had finally hit the floor. "Jack," Sarah whispered, watching the side mirror. "We've got a set of lights. They've been back there since the last crossroads. 2 miles, maybe 3. They aren't gaining, but they aren't fading." I didn't look back. I knew Miller's security guy had called in the reinforcements. "They're pacing us," I said, "waiting for the county line." That's where Miller's jurisdiction overlaps with his buddies in the sheriff's department. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a remnant of my time in the service. "Elena, stay in the bunk," I commanded. "Sarah, get the tablet. I need the manifest for this load. It's under a Category 4 security seal. If anyone unauthorized touches those doors, it triggers a federal notification to the DOT." Suddenly, the lights behind us exploded into a strobe of blue and red. The siren gave a short, sharp yip, the Predator closing the gap. I didn't slam the brakes. I let the engine brake create a rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum as I pulled the rig onto the narrow shoulder, kicking up a cloud of limestone dust. I stepped out into the humid night air, standing by my driver's side steps with my hands visible on the chrome rail. The officer who stepped out of the cruiser was young, his face carved out of a bar of soap, his hand hovering over his holster. "License, registration, and logbook," he shouted. "You've got my DOT number on the door," I said, my voice projecting without shouting. "I'm Jack Mercer. Before we go further, I need the reason for this stop. My GPS shows I was doing 55. "We had a report of a suspicious vehicle," he snapped, his eyes darting toward my cab. "I have reason to believe you're transporting an unauthorized passenger." "Is that a fact?" I asked, a cold smile touching my lips. "I'm hauling federally bonded cargo. If you're accusing me of a crime, call your supervisor and tell Sergeant Miller that the property he's looking for isn't on this manifest." The officer flinched at Miller's name. He hadn't expected me to know the puppet master. "Step aside, Mercer. I have probable cause. You have a tip from a man in a rented Chevy who tried to intimidate me 20 miles back," I countered. My dashcam recorded his threats and his phone call. "If you open that door without a warrant, you're tampering with a federal load. That's a one-way ticket to a desk job at the DMV." Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was caught between Miller's orders and his own career. But before he could move, a second set of headlights appeared, then a third, then a fourth. The massive, square silhouettes of 3 other 18-wheelers roared onto the shoulder, surrounding the patrol car in a wall of steel and chrome. One by one, they released their air brakes, psh, psh, and sat idling in unison. My brothers had arrived. Grizzly and the convoy had formed a cage of light around the young officer. "What is this?" he stammered. "This," I said, leaning in close, "is what happens when you use the law to help a bully. This stop is being live-streamed to a cloud server. If you want to be part of the cleanup crew when Miller goes down, stay here. If you want to keep your badge, get in your car and tell dispatch this was a false alarm." The officer looked at the wall of trucks, then at me. He saw the phoenix pin on my lapel, gleaming in the strobes. Without a word, he turned, ran back to his cruiser, and sped off. The silence that followed was heavy. Grizzly's voice crackled over the CB. "Clear road ahead, Redline. We'll be 5 miles back if you need a tail gunner." "Thanks, Grizzly," I said. "I owe you a steak." I climbed back into the cab. Sarah was pale, and from the sleeper I heard Elena finally let out a sob. "We're okay," I said. "The road is open." But I knew Miller wasn't done. He was a cornered animal now. "Jack," Sarah said, pointing to the GPS. "There's a bridge 10 miles up, a single-lane construction zone. The perfect place for a final stand. Miller wouldn't need a patrol car there. He'd just need a way to stop the world. Then we'll just have to make sure we're the ones holding the hammer when we get there," I said, shifting into gear. The bridge at the county line loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal structure of orange steel and concrete jersey barriers. It was a bottleneck, a single lane of narrow passage where the road construction had choked the life out of the highway. As I approached, I saw the flashing yellow lights of the construction zone, but I also saw something else. A dark shape parked perpendicular across the only open lane. It wasn't a patrol car. It was a heavy-duty black pickup, the kind with reinforced bumpers and enough torque to pull a house. Standing in the middle of the road, bathed in the harsh glare of my high beams, was a man who didn't need a uniform to look like a threat. He was thick-necked and balding, wearing a tactical vest over a civilian shirt. This was Miller. He wasn't hiding behind a rookie cop anymore. He was standing his ground, a king in a kingdom of one lane. I felt the Peterbilt groan as I downshifted, the air brakes hissing a warning. I stopped 30 feet from his truck. The engine's idle was a low, hungry growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Stay here," I said to Sarah and Elena. My voice was like a heavy chain being dragged over stone. "Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me." I stepped out of the cab. The wind was whipping across the bridge, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby marshes. Miller didn't move. He held a heavy flashlight in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. As I walked toward him, I didn't rush. I kept my gait steady, my boots making a hollow thump-thump on the bridge deck. "You're a hard man to find, Mercer," Miller said as I stepped into the circle of his light. His voice was sandpaper and vinegar. "But the road always ends somewhere. This is where yours stops." "You're blocking a federal hall, Miller," I said. "That's a big swing for a man who's already on the edge of a cliff." Miller laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A cliff? I am the cliff. I've run this district for 12 years. I know every judge, every councilman, and every hole in the swamp where things disappear. That woman in your truck? She's a fugitive. She stole property from my house. I'm just here to recover it." "She didn't steal property," I said, stopping 6 feet from him. I could see the glint of the badge clipped to his belt, a symbol he'd turned into a weapon. "She saved her life, and the only thing she took was a future for her son, a future you tried to starve out of him." Miller took a step closer, the light of his flashlight reflecting off the phoenix pin on my chest. "I know who you are, Redline. I looked you up. A war hero who couldn't stay retired. You think because you survived the ridge you can survive me. You're a trucker. You're a ghost hauling garbage. I'm the law. You're a bully with a piece of tin," I countered, "and you're forgetting the first rule of the road. You never know what's in the trailer." Miller reached for his holster, a slow, deliberate movement. "I don't care what's in the trailer. I care what's in the cab. Give me the girl and the kid and you can drive away. Or don't, and I'll have this rig impounded and searched for contraband until there's nothing left but the frame." I didn't flinch. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a small, ruggedized tablet, the one linked to the Peterbilt's internal server. I turned the screen toward him. "You like receipts, Miller? I've got a whole folder of them," I said. "See this? It's a bank transfer log from the security firm you use to launder the cash you take from the bus terminal. And this is the metadata from that GPS tracker you put in Elena's photo. It's tied to your personal account. But here's the best part." I swiped the screen. A video began to play. It was the footage from the Miami Pier, the captain of the Azure Dream being led away in cuffs, and the first mate talking to a man in the shadows. The man in the shadows was Miller. "You weren't just protecting your property, were you?" I asked. "You were the one helping Corvus Logistics move those leaking crates through the port. You're the reason my unit was betrayed 16 years ago. You're the silent partner who's been getting paid to look the other way while men died." Miller's face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. His hand froze on his weapon. The arrogance that had sustained him for 12 years began to crack. He wasn't just a domestic abuser anymore. He was a traitor caught in the light. "You think that matters?" Miller hissed, though his voice was shaking. "Nobody's going to see that. You're on my bridge, in my county." "You're wrong," I said. I pointed to the sky. High above, the red and green blinking lights of a drone were hovering. "That's a direct connect security drone, part of the Category 4 protocol I told your rookie about. Everything we're saying is being broadcast to the carrier's headquarters and the state police, and they aren't the only ones watching." I looked back over my shoulder. From the far end of the bridge, the headlights of the convoy began to appear. Grizzly, Big Mike, and 4 others. They didn't stop. They kept coming until they were bumper to bumper behind my rig, their engines creating a roar that shook the very foundations of the bridge. "The Brotherhood doesn't like it when people mess with the manifest," I said. "And the world doesn't like it when a man tries to starve a child to keep a secret." Miller looked at the wall of trucks, then at the drone, then at the tablet. He was a man who had spent his life making the world small for others, and now the world had become too big for him to handle. He let go of his holster. His shoulders slumped, the weight of 16 years of lies finally crushing him. "It was just business," he whispered. "No," I said, my voice echoing off the steel beams. "It was a betrayal, and the road is finally calling it in." At the far end of the bridge, blue and white lights began to flicker. Not local police, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They moved with a purpose that told me the receipts had already done their work. I walked back to my truck without looking at him again. I climbed into the cab and shut the door, the sound of the latch feeling like the final period at the end of a long, dark sentence. Elena was crying, but it wasn't the sound of fear anymore. It was the sound of a woman who had finally stepped across the state line of her own life. I looked at Sarah. She was holding Leo, who had woken up and was watching the flashing lights with wide, silent eyes. "Is the man gone, Jack?" Leo asked. "He's gone, Scout," I said, putting the truck in gear. "And tomorrow we're going to get you the biggest breakfast in Savannah. No more starving. Not today. Not ever." As I pulled the rig forward, the FDLE officers swarmed Miller's truck. I didn't stop to watch. I had a load to deliver and a promise to keep. The road ahead was clear, the blacktop stretching out under a moon that finally looked like it was shining on something clean. I sat in the cab for a long time after the sirens faded into the distance, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine. The silence of the Florida night had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now, cleaner, lighter. In the back, the soft, even breathing of a sleeping child was the only sound that mattered. Leo was curled up under one of my old wool blankets, his small hand tucked under his chin, finally safe from the shadows of the man who thought he could own him. Elena was sitting on the edge of the passenger seat, her head resting against the window. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just watching the stars, her reflection in the glass looking like a woman who had finally found her way home after a lifetime of being lost. I realized then that the Azure Dream wasn't just a boat I'd left behind at the pier. It was the name for every false promise people like Miller and that captain used to trap the vulnerable. Tonight, we hadn't just hauled a load, we'd broken a cycle. I reached out and adjusted the Phoenix pin on my lapel. For 16 years, it had felt like a brand of shame, a reminder of the day I couldn't save my men. But as I looked at the family in my cab, the weight of it felt right. It wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a lantern. And as long as there's a road beneath my wheels and a light in the window of a diner, I'll keep driving toward the truth. The road doesn't just take you from point A to point B. Sometimes it gives you the chance to fix the miles you left broken behind you. If this story reminded you that some things are worth standing up for, no matter how much time has passed, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. We're building a community here of people who believe in honor, the truth, and looking out for the person in the lane next to you. Drop a lantern in the comments if you've ever had to be the light in someone else's dark night. And if you want, tell us about it. It's an honor to have you riding. I'll see you on the next haul. Stay safe out there.